All right, so in this video, I'm going to share with you a few simple ways that you can, number one, start to resolve and sort out and calm down internal imbalances, things like anxiety and depression and nervous system issues. And number two, learn to actually survive and thrive over the next few years of ridiculous change that we are very likely going to see. So many people think that they are depressed or anxious or have these perhaps sophisticated mental emotional issues, which of course there are plenty of instances in which that is true. However, it is also true that oftentimes what people are actually experiencing is just overstimulation. So what happens is you are continually raising your threshold of stimulation. So then you kind of feel less and less, you experience less and less, you notice less and less, and your overall experience of reality becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So then, of course, that makes you feel depressed because life is flat, it's dull, it doesn't really have the luster. You don't have the ability to actually enjoy the present moment or really gain enjoyment from really simple things in life. And then on the flip side, because it becomes so small, you have this underlying anxiety because there's just so little that you actually can experience and so much that you can't. So that tends to really limit your outlook, your perceptions, and even the choices that you make. So of course the outcome is perceived feeling of anxiousness or depression or any other mental emotional imbalance, whether that's insomnia or things of that nature. So in reality, many people are oftentimes just overstimulated and unconsciously behaving in ways that just constantly reinforce and exaggerate that overstimulation. And that's not necessarily anyone's particular fault. I'm not blaming anyone necessarily. A lot of it is just that the fact that this is how the modern world is really structured. If you look at the way in which media has changed, or at least over the last 10 years, everything is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and more condensed, quicker changes, and then more in every single frame and shot, and everything is just more aggressive. Um, Even just noticing going out to eat over the years, like the flavors in restaurants keep getting more aggressive. Everything's way more salty. And it's just kind of examples of what I'm talking about. And then especially if you look at smartphones and social media, you can see the same thing. But the fact of the matter is these things condition our nervous system and are also reflections of the conditioning of people's nervous system. And if you don't know that and you're not aware of it, then it can have a really negative impact on you. So as humans, we are mostly driven by what we find stimulating and what generates a strong internal reaction. This is how media works. This is how advertising works. If you watched a TV show and it generated no stimulation in you, you wouldn't watch it. You would call that boring. Like, because you're not feeling anything. You're not noticing anything. It's not pulling you in. It's not engaging your stress response or stimulating your emotions or stimulating your intellect or stimulating your sexual response. You would just consider that boring. So that's really an important thing to understand, because the more stimulating something is, oftentimes the better we think it is. And when in reality, it's just stimulating, it's just stimulation. And actually requires more discernment and analysis to actually see if it's really positive or really negative, really taking us in a good direction or a bad direction. And basically confusing something feeling really strong with it must be good, when in reality it's just something that we feel really strongly. And this is especially important if we're someone who is trying to practice mindfulness or increase our health or personal development or spirituality. This way of being in the world and this way of relating to ourselves is actually kind of the antithesis of all of the classical teachings and all of the outcomes that many of these practices are trying to create. So people tend to experience and process and experience in three ways. We kind of relate to the world in three ways: intellectually, emotionally, and sexually. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much mostly all of what people have access to the vast majority of the time. Of course, there's exceptions. Of course, there are things which are higher that, some people do access, but most people don't. Most people are experiencing these one of three things and then trying to call it something else, trying to call it something higher, which is just the same thing as experiencing something that's stimulating and thinking it's good or positive or useful, or in reality it's just stimulating. Can go either way. So we tend to react to experiences, process things, and seek stimulation intellectually, emotionally, and sexually. And in reality, as humans, this is the primary motivating factor behind quite a lot of what we actually do and what a lot of actually um, makes up our life experience and what makes up our identity. Is we have strong emotional reactions to certain experiences that our awareness selects as more important than others, intellectually, emotionally, or sexually. And then we develop our identity around those things. And then that determines basically down the road what we actually can experience and will experience, because we're usually just wanting to reinforce and re-experience those things that we chose to be positive. So confirm what we already think, feel, and believe, stimulate our emotions, the ones that we like to feel, and then stimulate our sex drive via either overtly sexual material or the covert way that a lot of people do it and don't realize it, which is all this fear and thrill based stuff. All these murder shows and murder podcasts and true crime and basically all the stuff that stimulates people's fear and their anxiousness, their fight or flight response. That is also stimulating your sex drive and your sexuality, just kind of in the other way, because fear and sexuality are highly interrelated. And the more fear someone has in their system is the more sex drive they're going to have, and the more they're going to lean towards that part of their experience. Which, to be frank, that's one of the lowest, most base, least developed aspects of humans and of all mammals. It's just really basic survival mode. So again, if we're someone who's trying to develop or heal our body or do spirituality, and we're just highly engaged in identifying the absolute lowest base aspects of our nature, it's again probably a little bit of a contradiction. Um, and that's also something that, of course, over time, if it's overdone or exaggerated, can kind of deplete and stress the body. So it's again another reason, if it's health we're trying to do, but also just stabilizing our emotions and stabilizing our nervous system, our mentality. This is a big piece. This is a big way in which many people can really imbalance themselves and create a lot of chaos in their lives. So if we actually want to start sorting things out and not have our nervous system destroyed over the next few years, if it hasn't been already from the last few years, it's number one, start to look at and observe and bring awareness to how often and when we are engaging in these behaviors, and when we are actually looking into ourselves and seeing why and what's pushing us and what's motivating us and what we think we're getting out of it. Because that's usually what it comes down to, is we think we're getting something, we think we get some need met, or something is being supported or validated or reinforced. And that is the important thing to look at. Also, where we experience conflict within those regions, that is also another important thing to look at. So once you have the awareness, then you go to the step two, which is start to maybe minimize it where you can, start to maybe eliminate things that are extraneous or overtly harmful, or just maybe not going in the direction that you want to go in. And then most importantly, number three is give yourself downtime. Give yourself off time. Give yourself time to do nothing. Give yourself time to just be with yourself, or sit in quiet, or look at a wall, or go for a walk. Like, remove yourself from all the stimulation for periods of time. It doesn't have to be your whole life, but I mean, at least every day or something, just give yourself some quiet time away from phones, TVs, music, books, magazines, everything that's going to either stimulate your emotions, your intellect, or your sex drive. Just give yourself some downtime and some space to kind of breathe and recalibrate. Because if we're always just reacting to things and always just being stimulated, that's not really a great way for people to live, especially because if that's your programming, it's not going to be a great scenario as things just keep ramping up their threshold and degree of stimulation over the next coming years, just because that's the way the media landscape and the societal thing is going in general. And I mean, I see it mostly every time I go out. It's just people seem to be more out to lunch and more ridiculous. People in the grocery store standing in the middle of the aisle scrolling through TikTok. It's like, You're in the middle of the aisle, your cart's blocking the aisle, you're grocery shopping. Why are you doing this? People at a stoplight, same thing. People in every spare moment of life, same thing. And then when you actually talk to them, they're just have no idea really where they are, no idea where their body is. If you look at how most people walk through the world, they have no awareness oftentimes of where they even are in space, stomping around, tripping on things, hitting things, dropping things. It's like, and if that's already in place, then all this other stimulation I'm talking about is just going to make it worse. So if we're wanting to be healthier, we're going to need to look at these things and typically start to be in our body a bit more and develop more interoception and proprioception, and more importantly, better decision-making processes.